So to me, it's risk and benefit. And to me, probably the risk from the vaccine itself is extremely low, but I can't tell you it's zero. There's these potential things that happen to any vaccine, but very unlikely. Probably more likely if you get COVID that you have one of those somewhat severe side effects. And so to me, it's that risk benefit ratio of I'd err on probably the benefit of a vaccine. To me, for most people, is going to be much better than the risk of getting COVID.
Welcome to Envibe Live Conversations with Amy Parker and Cheryl Dunn. By tuning in, you are joining a community that will inspire you to increase balance, wellness, and joy in your life. We'll offer expert information and insightful conversations to help us on our journey to live more Envibe. For more information and articles, remember to also check out our website at envibelife.com. That's ENVIBELIFE.com. We're grateful that you're here.
Hello, welcome to the Envibe Life Conversations podcast with Amy Parker and Cheryl Dunn. We have a return guest today we're really excited about, Dr. Jeff Yorio with Texas Oncology. Dr. Yorio joined us a few months ago because he has kind of gained a following with your Facebook post and other information, Dr. Yorio, in Austin since the beginning of the COVID epidemic, for tracking the epidemic, tracking the statistics, giving really detailed and easy to understand reports about that, especially in the Austin community, but really even in Texas and the greater community beyond. So thank you, Dr. Yorio, for joining us for another installment of our COVID information series we're starting here. Hopefully they won't last too much longer, right? We're so glad to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me. For having me back.
So can you give us just a little update? We're a couple weeks past spring break. So can you give our audience a little bit of update of where COVID stands in our community in Austin and
in the US and worldwide? Yeah.
Sure. I guess in Austin itself, I think things have been fairly steady as far as new cases of COVID-19 and as far as hospitalizations. We've seen kind of I'd say we saw a pretty good substantial decrease, from kind of the peaks in January and beginning of February, and then kind of dropped to where we're at now, kind of in March, and over the last sort of month, it's been fairly steady. Maybe there's a very slight uptick in cases over the last 1 to 2 weeks, but not a dramatic one. But still averaging kind of on the order of probably 100 to 120 cases a day in the Austin area. And then hospitalizations, kind of similarly, we've seen this kind of drop in cases, since our peaks kind of towards the end of January and February. And now it's kind of plateaued out, and on average, I think there's about 130 to 140, people in the hospital with COVID-19 on any given day. And that seems to have kind of mostly plateaued over this last month. So I feel like we're in this kind of plateau region and haven't necessarily seen a big uptick over the last few weeks by any means. So that's good.
Similarly, it just feels different. It feels different out there right now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you're seeing people being more active, I guess, more activity going on, and people, but yeah, less of those big cases, it seems like, and less of what we were seeing certainly in January and February and kind of throughout the winter, which is good. I think it's different in Texas, probably similar. Maybe there's been a little bit of slight uptick throughout Texas in these last few weeks, but not a major spike, at least at this point. And so again, kind of seems like we've hit more of that plateau region in Texas. The US, I think a little different. You're seeing maybe a little more of an uptick in cases. And I think there's some of these different regions where you're just seeing more of an increase or more of a spike. Whether that's due, some people, probably some of that's due to some of the the newer variants. I think the UK variant that seems to be a little more virulent, probably is getting more spread more throughout the US. And so I think in some of the regions where that's maybe hitting, maybe that's why you're seeing some of that uptick in those regions. But certainly not the massive peaks we were seeing or massive amount of cases we were seeing in the winter. So that's good. Hopefully it continues to last, and maybe evidence that things like vaccinations are starting to help to some extent.
So I think that is the big question, is the vaccines, and are we getting enough of them out? Are enough people signing up to do it? And is that part of the reason why we have less cases?
Yeah, I think it's probably contributing. It's always as we, we're starting to see more and more people get vaccinated and have their vaccines, out there in the population. I think we're up to, 25 to 30% of people probably in the Austin area or Texas have actually had their first, at least one vaccine, and maybe around getting closer to 20% that have been fully vaccinated. So that's good to see. So I think that certainly is starting to probably make a dent into that, and hopefully makes a dent into the hospitalization. One thing I'd like to point out, in one group, which is the people in these long-term healthcare facilities, so kind of the big nursing facilities, inpatient rehab centers, things like that, where there was a big push to get vaccines to those populations, early on. So the presumption is a really large amount of those people in those residents have been vaccinated, in January and February, and you've seen cases just plummet in those places. You've seen very few cases in those facilities. So that shows in these areas where, gosh, maybe 80% of those folks are actually vaccinated, or 80 to 90%. There's very few cases happening. So that's exciting, because that was a really high risk population, and that was responsible for a higher amount of deaths and things like that in those type of groups. So it shows you how vaccines are probably working really well when you get them to enough people, because there's very low levels of cases happening now in those facilities. So that's good. And then hopefully, again, we get more and more of the general population now vaccinated, and you start to see continue control of cases and decline in hospitalizations and ultimately deaths and long-term problems.
Well, and this is really one of the things we wanted to speak to you about today most, because in Texas now, everyone 16 and over can receive the vaccine. I happen to be part of the group that's only slightly over 50. So I was able to start receiving the vaccine when it went to 50 and above, I guess in the middle of March. And, a couple things happened with that. One, it's all my friends are talking about. And then now that our teenage children can receive it, or college age children, it's really all anyone's talking about. And one thing I found when I was really trying to research and find out more about the vaccine to see, do I really want to do this? Do I not want to do this? I don't know much about it. It's not that easy to find information about it. You kind of have the standard, I'm going to say party line, whoever that's coming from, I have no idea, and it's just repeated over and over and over in anything you look at. So I just kind of had to let all of that go to the wayside and kind of go with my gut a little bit. And I did choose to receive the vaccine. I've had one dose of the Moderna, but I'd really like you to talk about the three different vaccines and how they're different. Like, what is messenger RNA? And is that, it's something that creeps people out. It's like, oh my goodness, what are they doing to my RNA or DNA here? So would you just tell us a little about the vaccines in general?
Sure. So, the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are using messenger RNA technology, which is new for vaccines. It's not something that prior vaccines had incorporated. It is something that's been studied, a lot over the last 10 to 20 years. And so that's why they were able to kind of use that technology for this so quickly, because they've been really studying it for vaccinating for different viruses. And also, in the cancer world, we use it, or we've been studying it a lot, and how, maybe you can use those types of vaccinations to fight cancers. So that's always been a potential point of treatment or things we've looked at. But messenger RNA, if you go back to cell biology, you've got your cell, and then you've got the nucleus of the cell, and the nucleus of the cell is where our DNA is, and that's the backbone of any cell, and kind of the boss of the cell, right? That's what's telling the cells to do certain things. That's our foundation of the cell. And so what happens in a nucleus is the DNA will get turned into, it'll produce mRNA, little messenger RNAs that then leave the nucleus and go out into the cytoplasm, which is the kind of outer part of the cell. And then messenger RNA then is taken, and then it's turned into protein. And then proteins are actually what go and do different functions in cells or in the body or all throughout. And so that's kind of how it works. So DNA often will transcribe messenger RNA, just kind of like the communication, the little letter that gets sent out. And then somebody reads the outside in the cytoplasm, it gets read, and then protein gets made, and that's what actually turns into something. So if you think about the DNA is maybe like the architect, the messenger RNAs maybe like the architectural plans, and then the construction worker has to like read the plans and actually do the job, right? And build something. So something along those lines. And so these vaccines, what happens, they're using mRNA technology. So they're using their mRNA, coded technology that's surrounded in this little fat capsule, basically, that gets injected. That's necessary because mRNA is kind of actually very weak. It gets degraded really fast. So if you just stuck mRNA out there, it would just get destroyed. So it has to have this protective capsule. So it gets in this protective capsule. The protective capsule will go inside of cells, and it goes inside of these muscle cells nearby. And then the fat capsule breaks apart, and then you've got this messenger RNA that then can get encoded into protein. And then that protein goes to the surface of the cell, and then the immune system will recognize that protein and see, hey, that protein shouldn't be here. Let's formulate a attack against it, and then that's what creates this immune response, basically. That messenger RNA that goes into that cell gets degraded very fast. As soon as it gets transcribed into protein, it's going to get destroyed. So I've said it's kind of like Mission Impossible, where you get that little, you're going to read this message, and in 6 seconds it's going to get destroyed. You remember that whole, I don't know, you remember that? And so that's kind of what happens. It goes in, delivers the message, and then the message gets destroyed. So it disappears. So it's not in any way hanging around for a long time. And then messenger RNA has no way to get into the nucleus. So it has no way to affect the DNA of cells,
Okay.
which is what people worry about, right? Oh, is it affecting my DNA in some way?
Right.
And so it actually has no way to get transcribed or to get into the DNA. So the DNA is fully protected. It's in this, very high Fort Knox of the cell, so it can't get in there. So anyway, that's kind of how you think about it. So it's a pretty neat way to deliver these type of deals, so that the immune system can respond to it.
So Johnson & Johnson is not using that. What are they using?
Correct. So Johnson & Johnson's using basically an adenovirus as kind of a vector. And so they're using kind of similar in a way, where they're using inside the adenovirus itself, which is a dead virus, a dead adenovirus. But basically it's sending those in, and on the surface of those adenovirus cells, it's basically encoding these proteins that the immune system can respond to. Kind of similar, like it's encoding these proteins that are going to be seen as foreign, and they're the spike proteins of COVID. And so it allows the immune system to recognize those, but it's using this adenovirus as the vector instead of messenger RNA going into your own muscle cells, basically.
So is that similar to the flu vaccine?
A little bit. I mean, kind of similar to some other classic vaccines. They don't all use the adenovirus, but as a vector, but kind of more similar to traditional vaccines, I'd say.
So we've heard that the Pfizer and Moderna are more effective or their efficacy is in the 90%, where the Johnson & Johnson's in the 70% rates? Is that because of the delivery type or just the studies that have been done?
Yeah, hard to say. I mean, I think, it's sort of apples to oranges in a way, because the Johnson & Johnson, they only did one shot versus two shots. If you follow the Johnson & Johnson really far out, 60 days later, let's say, it looks like the efficacy is probably starts to approach higher, like 90% or something like that. And so maybe there's something to, had they done two shots of Johnson & Johnson, you may have gotten to that same type of number. That's kind of hard to say. And then they're looking at just actual cases of COVID. All three have been really effective at preventing serious illness from COVID. To me, that's probably the bottom line is, I don't think we ever expect vaccinations to be 100% effective in preventing COVID at all. But if you can turn COVID, which is a more serious illness for some people, into a much more mild illness, then you've kind of done your job. What you want, if it's gone from a very serious illness that you end up in the hospital to a mild cold that lasts 2 days, then then that's also doing its job, right? So you still may get infected and you still may get a little sick from it, but to prevent those serious illnesses, then I think that's really important to think about. So I think all three of them do a good job of that. Maybe Moderna and Pfizer did a slightly better job, at least in the initial kind of period when they studied, of preventing people from getting a symptomatic infection at all. But
so speaking of conversations with our friends, yes, there's the conversation about the vaccine, but there's also the conversation of those that are reluctant to go get it because of how quickly it was put out on the market, the lack of research behind it. There's many of reasons. The recall on the Johnson & Johnson this week, the stories of, paralysis and dying and different things of that from the vaccine. We're hearing all of those stories as well. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always, I think by and large, they've been very safe, as far as in the short term, and probably, just the way vaccines work, unlikely that they're going to cause long-term problems. So probably what you're seeing in the short term, are going to be the bigger side effects. So I think those were really well studied. All of these were used 30 to 40,000 people on these clinical trials. I mean, that's, I think for oncology drugs, which I'm involved with, we'll use 300 people on a clinical trial to make huge decisions, right? And decide that this drug is, effective or things like that. And of course, they're two very different things. I'm dealing with a much sicker population and all that type of stuff, but as opposed to potentially a healthy population that's getting a vaccine, and that's why you need thousands of more people to decide things. But still, just to give you an example, that's a lot of people on clinical trials when you start to get into 30 to 40,000 people. Probably most of the medicines that people take, whether it's, blood pressure medicines or statins or things like that, probably, used several thousands of people, but, most of them may not approach 30 to 40,000 people even on clinical trials when they do those type of things. So it's a lot of people that are involved with those trials, which is sort of reassuring to me, because it gives you a lot of data points about maybe what the safety might be like. But that said, you're still injecting, or you're getting something that's, foreign to your system. And anytime we inject medicine or take medicine, there's always some potential risk. Anytime we're going to give medicine to millions and millions of people, there's probably something that will happen to some people as a result, right? Because it's just what happens. If I give an antibiotic to millions and millions of people, there will be people who die from that antibiotic. That happens, and so if I give baby aspirin to millions and millions of people, or if millions and millions of people take, Tylenol or ibuprofen, there's people that have really, really severe side effects from those drugs as well. And so what you're seeing is, as millions of people start to take these vaccines, you probably start to pick up on these rare, extremely rare events, but still plausible and still things that happen. So I think that's, to me, it's always about risk and benefit, right? And so so certainly COVID is an awful illness that can cause big problems. In the high risk elderly population, very high amounts of deaths, right? We've seen that happen, as over 500,000 people and counting have died from this disease in the United States over the last year. COVID's caused a lot of other big long-term problems, people who are hospitalized, people who weren't hospitalized but still have these kind of long-term COVID problems, months to not smell or months to cause other issues. We've seen many people get blood clots as a result of COVID-19 infections, even very healthy 22-year-olds, I've seen get severe blood clots as a result of COVID-19, the infection itself. So those things are happening as a result of the infection.
So is that why, I mean, we kind of made a brief mention of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was suspended, I think 2 days ago when we're recording this podcast. And, we do intend to air it within a couple days of recording it. So hopefully the people will be getting this information in pretty real time. But the concern is a certain demographic, I think women between about 18 and 50, I read, getting blood clots. Is it because that's an effect of COVID in general, or is it something completely different with the vaccine or the administration of the vaccine itself?
And the reality is, I don't quite know the answer to that question at this point, right?
Which is why it was suspended, right?
Yeah, as they're trying to figure out, and I think that's, I think they're just being safe. The press release said there's 6 cases of this that they have seen with Johnson & Johnson. That's out of 7 million vaccines given. So you're talking about, at this point, less than 1 in a million chance of this happening. But they're seeing those cases, and they're a severe blood clot that people are seeing, that they think is as a result of that vaccine. As I said, there's been, I don't know how many, but several cases published out there about COVID-19 causing a very similar blood clot problem. So probably mechanistically, I think I'd like to think there's probably something there that the vaccine and maybe the immune response to it is causing clots, similar to how the immune response to COVID itself is probably stimulating these type of clots to happen. And so I think there's probably some similarity there, because it's maybe how your immune system's responding to it. But I don't know that for sure. We'll have to learn more information. You think about birth control pills in women, and the chance of having a blood clot is 1 in 100 with the birth control pills. So 1 in 100, 1% chance versus 1 in a million, which is 0.001% of a chance. So anyway, that's something to think about. But the type of clot they've seen was a very severe type of clot. So I think that's why they wanted to say, hey, let's take a pause and let's learn about this, and see what we can find out, and see if we agree with continuing to go forward with the vaccine itself. And that's why AstraZeneca, which is not approved here in the US yet, but they were seeing blood clots with it as well.
So speaking about side effects, just an interesting question. I was one of the people, I feel like among people I know people who just were blindly going to get the vaccine the first minute they could possibly get it. And I know people who are really scared or reluctant to get it and are really just not doing it. I was the rare somewhere in the middle person, I felt like, where it's like, I'm just not quite sure, but I, also don't want to get sick. I have some underlying health conditions, things like that. In trying to find information, like I said, first of all, it was hard to find. But one of the things I came across that I thought was really interesting is that the more, I guess, the stronger your immune system, the more of a response you might have to the vaccine. And so I read something, and this was interesting to me because I have 3 young sons, that the younger people, because their immune system is so strong, may actually see more of a response even to the first dose than people in older demographics.
What do you mean by more of a response?
Well, so like my in-laws, for example, in their 70s, zero response except a sore arm to either vaccine.
Zero side effects.
Side effects.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Side
You're
effects.
right. You're right. Okay. So thank you for correcting me.
Yeah.
Where, like I am just someone who's very sensitive to things. And even after the first dose, had a couple days where I didn't feel awesome, super tired, nausea, headache. And then I woke up on about the third day, like, okay, everything's great, like back to normal. And my 20-year-old and 16-year-old, who one got the Johnson & Johnson and one got, of course, the Pfizer, he's 16, had very similar to what I did for about 24 to 48 hours, just low-level headache and nausea feeling off. And it was so odd to me because I thought, oh, well, the young guys they're just going to get it and move on with life. Like we've heard so many stories of teenagers getting COVID and didn't even know they had it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's, certainly probably our immune system's stronger the younger we are. So that's helpful. Hard to say, I guess, because of course you're seeing varying side effects throughout all the age groups and things like that. And just people, but certainly I think maybe some people are going to be more sensitive to it. Maybe they have much more of this kind of immune response to it initially that causes the fevers and the, just kind of like an achiness and a lethargy type of thing. And so I think that's certainly there. And you're seeing that in a good percentage of folks and probably has something to do with just how their immune system's reacting to it.
And I just thought it was important to mention, first of all, I thought it was really interesting. And second of all, so that you don't get overly scared if you get that reaction after one dose, or now if you've had a Johnson & Johnson, not that they're being given right now. Like I was glad I knew that before my two sons got it, or I might have been more alarmed by them at that age having that response.
Definitely. And I think that's just something that you have to think about. Oh, these type of responses are probably going to be pretty expected with the vaccines, and they're, most of them are going to be pretty self-limiting, like your experience, 2 days didn't feel too great. And then all of a sudden it was gone and not, I feel much better. So, yeah.
It's interesting. I'll fess up. I'm super reluctant to get it, but I am also one of those people that was 28 years old on birth control that had a TIA. Right.
Yeah.
So, and I haven't been on any hormones since then, obviously. But, so there is this piece of me and I don't take any medication. I live a very healthy lifestyle. I know I'm not immune to things, but there's a piece of me that has this belief that why go put a foreign substance in my body when I'm really doing great?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, to me, it's risk and benefit, right? And you start weighing, and that's what I always think about. And I always counsel people on with any medicine is that anything you introduce in your body medicine wise is always going to be a risk and benefit ratio, right? Of what makes sense for you may not always make sense for somebody else, but kind of weighing those pros and cons of things. And so to me, it's always been the risk with COVID is it's a bad virus. Majority of people get through it probably just fine, right? As you've all seen, kids have gotten through it, and friends have probably gotten through it well. And
my parents got through it fine.
Parents got through it fine, and so it's just risk and benefit, to me of things. Now, there's a lot of big complications that can happen with COVID. Obviously, that we've seen, from severe hospitalizations to blood clots to chronic issues. And the problem is we haven't all, you can predict some of those things. I think, older age, multiple comorbidities, obesity are huge risk factors for COVID. But as I said, you do see some of these other things like TIAs and stroke-like events with COVID itself, or blood clot, even in young, healthy, people. And so to me, it's risk and benefit. And to me, probably the risk from the vaccine itself is extremely low, but I can't tell you it's zero. There's these potential things that happen to any vaccine. But very unlikely, probably more likely if you get COVID that you have one of those somewhat severe side effects. And so to me, it's that risk benefit ratio of I'd err on probably the benefit of a vaccine to me for most people is going to be much better than the risk of getting COVID. Although it changes, as I said, with some different people, their risk with COVID starts to get lower and lower, and so then you weigh that risk factor with the vaccine. Still, if you're going pound for pound between the two issues, I'd say that the illness is probably still has that potential to do worse things than the vaccine would. But I can't tell you that the vaccine's 100% not going to cause any problems, because it still has that little tiny chance that it.
And it's so new. I just feel like just like with COVID, where we have learned so much as it's gone on. Like, we're learning that there's more and more side effects from it, even after you're past the initial piece. We're learning there's these long-term effects from COVID, and we've only been around it for a little over a year now. Wouldn't you say it's very valid that as the longer the vaccine's around, we might see that there's more and more side effects from it as well?
And potentially so. You never know. I think, as I said, with most vaccines, probably you see that initial kind of, problems are usually in that first couple of weeks afterwards, if there's any major things, and even in any of the things they've picked up on have all seemed to be more in the the few weeks following getting the vaccine itself. So, as I said, to me, it's risk and benefit. To me, it's COVID's caused such problems and wreaked such havoc on our society and on so many people. So to me, the risk with the vaccine is extremely, extremely low. But I can't say it's zero. There's still, there's always some risk involved. It's probably riskier to go drive to the vaccine, to go get the vaccine than it is to get the vaccine, right? Because your chance of getting into some huge car accident is probably much higher than actually any bad effect from the vaccine.
Well, I have driven with Cheryl, and I can say that's totally true.
She's right. I am not a good driver. I'll not have. I think I'm a great driver, but everybody else in the car gets a little scared.
So there's that. So certainly that. And as I said, I think to me, even for young people, the risk with COVID itself, even though very low of having major complications, still probably that risk is much higher than any risk of major complications.
I have heard some stories, like Cheryl's right. The longer we go, the more personal anecdotes, and they're all maybe not personally known, but we're a really good friend's neighbor, or so, they're within that degree of separation enough to make you sort of catch your breath a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the reality is that I think it's a really hard virus. And to me, for society to move forward in a proper way, and so to me, some of it's a society thing of sorts too, of like.
And I think that's very valid. Mm-hmm. We do need to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so for society to really move forward, to me, we have to. The vaccines are really our way forward, to get to a better place.
Where do you think we stand on herd immunity right now?
I think we're still a ways away from it. True herd immunity is probably, I guess it's how you define it, but if you're looking at true herd immunity, you probably need 85% or 90% of people to ultimately get vaccinated or maybe have had the disease, and so we're probably still quite a ways from that. If you're thinking maybe we're in the 25 to 30% of people have been vaccinated. Who knows how many people have truly had the virus, but maybe let's say it's 25% or 30% as well, which, I've seen numbers kind of approximating that. And so maybe 45 to 50% of people, like in Texas, let's say, have either been vaccinated or had the virus. There's thoughts that if you've had the virus, your immunity is going to wane a little bit with time, so you'll be still susceptible to get it again. I have no idea how long the vaccine immunity is going to last. Nobody does, and so that's something we're still learning. And so even if we're at 50%, we're still probably away from true herd immunity. Now, being at 50%, it probably starts to slow the chances that the virus spreads, but not eliminate it entirely, right? Or not get it to really, really low numbers. So so an example would be like measles, MMR vaccines, right? Measles, mumps, rubella vaccines. There was a time when you saw very few measles cases in the US, for a period of time. But as people become more hesitant about vaccines, you start to see more cases of measles pop up, especially in different communities, right? And so as those communities drop below, let's say 90% or 85% immunity with their vaccines, you started to see measles reappear in higher amounts of cases. And so that just shows you kind of there's that herd immunity line maybe of how many cases are really going to be out there, and you probably have to get somewhere in that 85 to 90% range to really mostly eradicate the disease or make it very low.
So if you've had COVID and you have the antibodies, does that count towards the herd immunity? And if you have the antibodies, do you really need to get the vaccine?
Good question. I think our thoughts are, or the thoughts I've seen out there are that, probably still effective to get the vaccine. I've typically, that first 3 months after your infection, we're not really seeing reinfections that early on, but we are starting to see some reinfections if you got, 3 months and beyond from your COVID infection. And so the thought is probably that it wanes a little bit with time. And that probably they will need the vaccine. Otherwise, they're going to be still susceptible to get it again. And so it just all depends. If our ultimate goal is to try to really get this virus to really low numbers, then I think you've got to get, the majority, that 80, 90% of people have to get vaccinated. Otherwise, you'll continue to see it circulate.
Wow. Can you estimate when you think here in Austin or here in Texas, you think we'll be at that?
I don't know if we'll ever get there, because I think there's they say 30 to 40% of people are not going to get the vaccine. So then you may never actually reach that. You may never actually reach full herd immunity. So you'll still get outbreaks that will start happening. Much like, as I said, what you see with measles when it drops below that kind of threshold.
Fascinating.
So when I was making my choice, like I said, I really was looking at both sides of it and weighing it. I just really felt like I was kind of in a lose-lose. And it just kind of re-impressed upon me, this is just a really bad situation we're in the middle of. And there aren't great answers to it. And I just have to accept the situation I'm in. And I think, sort of my desire for things to get back to normal and for everyone else to get back to normal, along with having underlying health conditions, are what pushed me in the direction of moving forward and getting the vaccine.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. It's, yes, in a perfect world, you wouldn't have to introduce any of this, or do any of this. But to me, in order to be healthy and move society forward, I think it's something that's going to ultimately, it's, to me, the best way forward, is to get as many people vaccinated as possible. And as I said, I think you look at other diseases like polio or something like that, where we're really required, 80 to 90% of the population getting vaccinated to drop it to where polio, we don't talk about polio anymore, right? So, but it was a really awful disease. And I don't know if you've ever met anybody who had polio, but it was a devastating, awful disease to have. And what's different today versus back then is, people didn't even question going to get vaccinated for polio. People ran out their doors to go get that vaccine, right? Because they saw their friends and they saw their family members get hit with this disease. Society's changed a lot in how we view things, I guess, but and probably most of us have seen friends or family members be very affected because of COVID, and die because of COVID and other things. And but for some reason we don't have that same desire to go get vaccinated. There's more questions out there, I guess, but that's what I would impress upon people. I think it's, good to move forward with doing them.
I truly believe that it is the path to moving forward, but it is interesting. Like I'll have one patient 1 hour who says, I have an autoimmune disease. So yes, I am going to get this vaccine ASAP because I have these underlying conditions. The very next hour, I'll have a client say, I have an autoimmune disease. There's no way I'm going to go do this because I already have an immune problem. Yeah. So it's just so they're all over the board with it, and they might have, and what's going on in their body might be the same, but the story around it is different for them. So it's just fascinating, Yeah,
no, it is. I mean, it's interesting how people will take how they'll interpret information for themselves and think about it. So, and I get it. It's, it's new and it's something we don't always, you haven't had the luxury of all this time to think about or know about. And, but so was this pandemic, right? We had to deal with it on the fly, and it's been devastating. It's been a devastating illness for the world.
Yeah. I think you've been super helpful.
This has been a great conversation.
Informative, giving people some answers, and as much as we all can right now. I feel like all of our hands are tied with the information, because just as time goes on, we'll all know more.
Yes, right? Correct.
So I think this is great. And I think that it's important for people to get out and talk to people like you, because, as we found, all of our friends are talking, but you're really out there dealing with it, dealing with the vaccines, dealing with the people, and seeing what's going on. So thank you for coming on.
Appreciate everything you've been doing for the Austin community and for joining us to share some of that insight.
I think one thing, Amy, and I want to make sure that is said, is that you work at Texas Oncology, and you have noticed that there have been an influx of cancer patients because people were not getting screened over COVID. And so we want people to just get back out there and do their screenings. And do you have a message for our audience?
Definitely. Yeah. I think, unfortunately, we saw a drastic decline in cancer incidence last year from March to June or July. There was a really big decrease in the diagnoses of cancer. And that's directly related to, there wasn't as much people getting screened because they were worried about going to the doctor. More hesitancy just to go to the doctor with symptoms, and I think that was going on. And so what we are seeing now is probably the flip side of that. We're probably seeing, and I don't have all the data yet, but just my own gestalt is that we're starting to see a higher incidence of cancer recently start to happen. And it's because the diagnoses hadn't been caught, right? So it's not that cancer incidence is really going up. It's just last year it was down. This year it's going to be up because we're making up for it.
Right.
So go get your regular.
Whatever you need to do to feel comfortable to take care of yourself in every other way.
Yeah. And I feel like, any practitioner I've been to, or, doctors everyone is being completely, COVID safe with masking and cleaning. And so if you are not getting out there because of that, it's safe, right? Wouldn't you say that going to the doctor?
I think doctors' offices have done a really nice job of being safe and preventing things. And so, yeah, please.
And I can say, I think my dentist is more so than anyone else. So all your screenings, make sure you keep up with all of your appointments.
Yeah. For sure.
Well, thank you again. And it's been such a great pleasure, So.
And I'll say we'll look forward to seeing you next time. It'd be nice if we didn't have to, because there wouldn't need to be another update, but I have a feeling we will have another occasion to circle back and hopefully maybe have some great news to share.
Hopefully so. So, all right. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Envibe Live Conversations. For more information and to join our community, be sure to check out our website at envibelive.com. We look forward to sharing with you.